Hello, welcome back to part 2 of my breakdown and response to Light and Truth letter. Last episode we went over the manipulation section of the Light and Truth letter. Now we will be diving deep and going into the straw man fallacies, or the fallacy section. So, last section was it was over an hour, so we'll try and get them. This is just the one thing. Oh my gosh, this is going to be a long series. Ideally, I would just do one episode on each of these tabs here, but I think that that's probably not going to be possible. Okay, so straw man. So this is when you set up the opponent's argument to be... Oh, and by the way, I got my baby here. He's sleepy. His name is Atlas. Okay, anyways. Hope y'all are having a good day. Fallacy, straw man. This is when you set up the opponent's argument to be weaker than it is, then proceed to demolish the false weak version and claim victory. Kind of like how you set up weaker versions of critics and weaker claims in the examples just to demolish them, and then in some cases not even. And proceed to demolish the false weak version and claim victory. Example, Mormons believe you need magic underwear to get into heaven. We believe you need Jesus. It is dishonest because it does not genuinely engage with the opposing party's arguments. It may win points for the home team of like-minded people, but it does not bring anyone closer to the truth. So, once again, it's funny how you're taking a horrible example of what someone would say and then tearing it down and saying why it's wrong. Like the straw man fallacy you're pointing out, you're setting up here. Because the quote-unquote opponent's argument, or the critic's argument, the actual, right? We're talking Bill Reel, Radio Free Mormon, John DeLynn. I'm not even going to lie. Bill Reel and Radio Free Mormon, they get spicy. They might have even said something in jest as a joke like this. But when it comes to these actual official, very formal, like we're talking Bill Reel's formal videos that he does on Mormon history or breakdowns, or Bill Reel's like weekly breakdowns of scriptures, or John DeLynn's LDS discussion series. First off, this would not, even if this was said, this would not be the only thing said. This would be taken out of context because, for example, in LDS discussions, they build up to these statements, if they even say them at all, which they don't, because in LDS discussions, they're constantly aware that, hey, saying certain things would be offensive, and so we don't say them. Like in LDS discussions, they never use the term cult. They never label or brand the church as a cult. They'll use the term high demand religion. They will, that's one example of how they will go out of their way to not present the weakest argument. And LDS discussions presents all the arguments from fair and the most up-to-date apologetics and then addresses them. So, kind of crazy. And we saw this fallacy up here earlier in regards to the CES letter right here. This is where you set up the weakest argument, and it was also a half-truth. Right here, this was it. You set up a half-truth here, and you attacked it as a manipulation tactic when it wasn't. So, interesting. However, this example here, if we even broke it down, is it even wrong, right? So we believe that you need to make covenants, and in those covenants, right, you're given underwear. And you need those, you need your endowment, which is the magic underwear. It's underwear, it's garments. You need that endowment to get into heaven. In fact, we actively teach that, we do endowments for the dead so that they can get into heaven. You need all your ordinances, the covenant path. So it's using very inflammatory language by saying magic underwear instead of garments. But if we amended this statement to say Mormons believe you need garments to get into heaven, it would be a much more true statement, even though I don't think that even would be a consensus view. It's more like Mormons believe you need to receive your endowment, which gives you garments, which are believed to contain special protective properties if you wear it throughout your life, which... You're believing in a fabric that has special properties to protect you from harm. That's a magical thing. That's a mystical, supernatural thing. So the statement, coming back to the beginning, Mormons believe in magic underwear to get into heaven, it's inflammatory. I would never use it. Technically not true. You believe that you need supernatural, mystical underwear that contains properties that are not provable by science, but that you believe in, which could easily be qualified as magic in order to get into. But then the disingenuous part would be to get into heaven, right? There's other things you need to do to get into heaven. So, also, there's nothing to be attacked here, really. This is just, you believe this, I believe this. We're not even, like, a better straw man would be like, if I were to set up a weaker argument, I would say like Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon because of the Spalding manuscript, right? And then if I was a defender of the faith, I would attack the Spalding manuscript instead of the more up-to-date theories for how the Book of Mormon was written. And that would be a straw man, because I'm setting up the weaker argument. I'm setting up this idea that the Spalding manuscript was used, and I'm attacking it, which they do, by the way. And rather than, and which I think is going to happen in the Light and Truth letter, by the way, rather than addressing the most up-to-date examples of why we believe Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon and why we believe we can prove it, which is not the Spalding manuscript. So, are you doing okay, buddy? Yeah, okay. He's just cooking. Next fallacy. But you know what? I will say that straw man, probably the most widely used on both sides. I think that the best arguments I've seen in favor of the church can go unaddressed, and sometimes people set up like not the best arguments or some of the most weak faith arguments, but it's because fair promotes them. And I do think I say that on the other side as well in regards to when defenders try and attack critics. They'll take some of, like, for example, this whole page. They'll take some of that and attack it. Give me 1 second. Okay, we're back. No baby. Sorry. That's just, if you're a new parent, you understand. It is what it is. And I have to do this in my free time, so. Okay, ad hominem, attacking the person instead of their arguments, like Ward Radio attacking every single critic. John is a Latter-day Saint. We should not invite him to this equality debate because Mormons are bigots. Even then, this wouldn't be ad hominem if you said Mormons hold bigoted beliefs, or Mormons are taught bigoted beliefs. But yeah, if you're just addressing it outright, I mean, there's plenty of Mormons, I think coming to mind, Dan McClellan, who are not bigoted at all. Does not address the issue or lead to any understanding. Yeah, I rarely, if ever, see ad hominem. I think I see it, for example, in RFM, or Radio Free Mormon, but it's jokingly, and it's about people who are very disingenuous. So like, who's the dude on that? Jacob Hansen? Like, in more recent stuff, they're just like, F you, Jacob Hansen. But that's not because it's out of nowhere. It's because they have a long history of how Jacob Hansen has, they have this long-standing feud. And it's not, when it comes to the issues, there's no ad hominem in terms of anti-Mormon material. They are not attacking the person. What they do, for example, in the case of Fair, and what I would do against you, Austin, is I would say, hey, you are being disingenuous, and that's not ad hominem, because I will show you how you were disingenuous about the CES letter and how you were disingenuous about portraying the manipulation tactics used by critics. But you can always hide, Austin can always hide and retreat behind the fact that he can find a critic out there on Reddit or on Twitter who has said it, which is why I'm addressing this letter through the lens of only looking at the most well-known and professional critics. That being John DeLynn, Bill Reel, Radio Free Mormon, LDS Discussions, Mike from LDS Discussions, those people, those kinds of people. There's plenty of others. I can't name them all. But there's a lot of really good faith people out here who are doing amazing work. So yeah, ad hominem, I almost have exclusively seen in the case of critics of the church committing ad hominem against, or not critics, I'm sorry, critics of critics, these kinds of people. Hasty generalization. An inference is drawn from insufficient evidence, leaping to a conclusion. The church's affiliated investment manager, Ensign Peak, was fined $5 million for insufficient reporting of securities owned, so the church is sketchy. We all tend to take lazy shortcuts when we encounter new information. It's easier to write something often to engage with the issue. One or two more insights may address this concern. So, Fair has not addressed this concern in the slightest. The church has never once produced a statement that addresses any of the concerns. And the longer we wait, the more troubling information comes out regarding the church's investments and specifically the SEC violation. It is not a hasty generalization to say the church is sketchy when they've engaged in behavior like this. If the church is deliberately hiding assets because they don't want people to know what they're doing with their money or how they're managing it or how much they have, and they engage in illegal practices that they know are illegal, and then they are fined when they're caught by our government and have to officially pay $5 million of your tithing money, which there will be arguments, oh, it wasn't tithing money. Yes, it was. I'm not even going to go down that whole rabbit hole of it was their investment. They used money from their investments. Okay, how'd they get the money from their investments? It all comes back to tithing, dude. It is tithing. I don't care if you made $5 off of my $25 tithing and you use that $5. Doesn't matter. That's my tithing that you used. You used tithing. So it's not a hasty generalization to then say the church is sketchy and then to be distrusting of the church. Especially because, and you could even make the argument, this paragraph here is a hasty generalization because where's the evidence, right? But it's not a hasty generalization when there's people out there who have like over an hour-long video going into all the legal documents, all of the church responses, all of the church videos talking about it, and they just put it all out there, and then they make the whatever they want to say, the conclusion. So, like, for example, me, I when this happened, I looked into it. I literally pulled up the tax forms themselves because when I went to my stake president, he's like, well, that's just what someone says about the SEC violation. You don't actually know. And he was being so annoying. So I'm like, fine, dude. You want to play this game? Let's play it. I went into the actual tax forms, like the 13F tax forms and stuff. And if regarding the investments as well, I looked into the church's actual investments that they had to release. And I read the forms themselves. I didn't read what someone told me what was in the forms. It's like, you could listen to me say, like earlier in the last video when I brought up Brigham Young's thing, you could just listen to someone say, hey, they're using Brigham Young's quote wrong. And then you'd be like, okay, yeah. But it's like, you can always be like, why do you trust what they just said about that quote? So you have to go there yourself and actually look into it. And be like, okay, yeah, there you go. It's a very tiresome game. It's very tiring. But anyways, I did that in regards to this Ensign Peak and SEC violation. So, no, that's not a lazy shortcut. And when we encounter new information, at least in my case, I didn't take lazy shortcuts. And it sounds like you didn't either. Well, I mean, what you say makes it sound like, but what you present means you absolutely took lazy shortcuts, Austin. Especially in the writing of this. There's so many lazy mistakes like this with the CES letter. But in my case, when I was encountered with this information, I did a deep dive and I dove super into not just LDS discussions, not just Mormon stories, but Mormonism Live, Bill Reel, Radio Free Mormon, Zelf on the Shelf, all of these different critics. And not only that, then I did a deep dive into people like Jacob Hansen, A Thoughtful Faith, Getting Real with Stephen Jones, the Comeback podcast. I picked out 12 different podcasts that spoke directly to my issues from the Comeback podcast. I watched all of them, and then I wrote a mini essay on each of the 12. And then I wrote down and I highlighted the points, the reasons why they left the church, and then the reasons why they decided to come back to the church, and then their life circumstances at what point in time they decided to leave and when they decided to come back. That's not a lazy shortcut in the slightest. Whenever something was told to me, I try and go and verify it. So like I said, oh, you just made this claim, Austin, about how the CS letter was disingenuous with these. I can go verify the claim. I will go do that. So no, at least in my case, as a critic of the church now, I don't like taking lazy shortcuts. And what I find is the opposite. I find a lot of apologists making hasty generalizations about critics like this. There's a hasty generalization that critics would take lazy shortcuts when they don't. Also, one or two insights may address the concern. Notice the wording here, because the one or two insights that are probably from fairmormon.org, because no one else has even tried to touch this crap, because it's crap, don't address the concern. So, very clever use of the word may. Red herrings, using an unrelated issue to distract attention away from the relevant question. Whataboutism, used by political pundits, is a form of using a red herring. This is unequivocally the number one go-to of all apologists. They will answer questions that you didn't pose. They will answer the questions that you should have asked, but that you didn't ask. Especially even regarding the SEC violations here, they will use a red herring, and they will instead address a different issue about how you shouldn't be concerned with how the church handles their tithing, or they'll address a concern of whether or not lawyers would actually be aware that this was a bad thing to do and how we're jumping to conclusions. They will left and right throw out as many red herrings as it takes to get you away from the fact that the church was fined because they created shell companies signed off by the first presidency, and they knew what they were doing. The church focuses on moral issues. That's rich considering its roots in polygamy. This is not even an unrelated issue. The polygamy is a moral issue. That's what's also funny to me here. This isn't an unrelated issue to distract attention away from the relevant question. Because if the issue or the question was moral issues, polygamy is a part of that. Or if we're talking about the relevant question on whether or not the church is true, I think that is entirely relevant to say, hey, Jesus Christ Church should be one of the most moral churches on earth. And it at least shouldn't be one of the least moral. And what we run into is that our church consistently shows up on the bottom when it comes to morality. It is behind the curve. It is rooted in immorality. And you would at least expect the true Church of Jesus Christ to not be on the bottom or some of the very worst examples of morality or stances on moral issues. So I don't even understand. This is just a bad example for a red herring. Distracts attention away from the issues raised without addressing them. I have never once encountered this from critics of the church. They go out of their way to not only not strawman you, but to directly address apologist concerns. Like, for example, the LDS Discussions does a fantastic job at addressing apologist concerns. Maybe if you gave me a real example that we could actually delve into and dissect, and not just, like, who knows where he got this from. And that's the thing, once again, any dude on Twitter who posts something, I can use this and say that it's critics, but I'm addressing the highest critics. Okay, poisoning the well, or bulverism, attempting to discredit a person before their arguments are even heard. So I've seen this with apologists and defenders of the faith, where they poison the well in regards to any negative information about the church. This happens nonstop to people who try and leave the church. Like, you can't listen to that because it's not from the church's official site. Or because that person left the church, we can't trust them. Because that person was antagonistic to Joseph Smith, anything they wrote can't be trusted. Like, the amount of poisoning the well that the church does when it comes to people who are not inside the church, or when it comes to historical documents, even first-hand accounts that are contradictory to, like, they're against or opposed to Mormonism. It's like, nope, don't read them, can't trust them. Oh, you can't read anything a BYU scholar says because they're on the church's payroll. Yeah, funny joke, dude. We got Producing Ancient Scripture that has been worked on with people who are at BYU. Fantastic book that's going to go over how Joseph Smith produced ancient scripture. There are plenty of scholars. David Bachvoy was on the church's payroll for the longest time, and he wrote books on how to deal with how the Book of Mormon wasn't historical, and how biblical scholarship kind of undermines a lot of our core doctrines. I love BYU scholars. I think they put out great work. I think that there's another recent BYU essay posted that compared Joseph Smith's translation of the Bible to there was another someone's commentary on the Bible. Joseph Smith commentary on Bible, BYU. Here we go. Yep, Haley Wilson, Thomas Wayman, Ancient Scripture, Rithian Joseph Smith Bible Translation. This is from BYU. This is an amazing read. It goes over how his text, let me see. Adam Clarke's. So almost all of Joseph Smith's inspired revelations for his Bible translation come from Adam Clarke's commentary on the Holy Bible. And it's undeniable evidence. Joseph Smith absolutely was influenced and took commentary from Adam Clarke's commentary on the Bible to then put into his retranslation of the Bible, which is just another evidence that that translation, what Joseph Smith doing, wasn't inspired by God, it's inspired by the things around him. And this is a pattern that we see with Joseph Smith, where he takes outside influences and pulls them in and uses them. This is by BYU. Fantastic. Go read it. Go read it, Austin. I don't know what critics you're... And how do I know about that? Oh, from the critics, actually. Believe it or not, Austin. I learned about all these BYU studies from critics of the church. So, this is just ridiculous to me. Critics hope that their target will not engage in the information that may answer important questions. Hope their target will not engage in the information that may answer important questions. So this would be essentially fair, right? Or your letter here, right? Oh, you read the CS letter? Go check out the Light and Truth letter. I would not recommend anyone the Light and Truth letter, but not because you are a member, Austin, not because you believe, but because this is a poorly written letter that's guaranteed to hurt people's faith, actually, if they engage with it, if they actually look into it. They'll see all of these issues that are present within it. I think that it is the case that there is a lot of unfortunate, for example, someone at BYU will get a degree in Egyptology, and then they will make comments at fair conferences that are not supported by any scholarship, but then they will use their scholarly credentials to say these things that have no evidence. And then, I got to get the door. But then, in regards to their actual arguments in scholarship, none of it is what they would not say anything that they're actually saying to people at fair in a scholarly journal, in a scholarly forum, because they know that it wouldn't hold up. They know that it doesn't hold up. Okay, give me a second. Okay, I'm back. Thanks for bearing with me. I know this long-form content is not for everyone, and I'm super, super blown out, but it is what it is. Maybe I can... It's not any better. Yeah, it's just because it's a white web page. If I were to go somewhere that's not bright white, like this... Hold on. Oh my gosh, this is so much. There we go. See, I'm normal, but it's just. Anyways. Okay. We're on fallacies. Sorry, everyone. We did poisoning the well. Let's go. I would argue that poisoning the well happens on the other side way more than from critics poisoning the well with... In fact, from what I see, critics use church-approved material and BYU material to further their points, because they know that TBMs, there I am, is that a manipulation tactic? True-believing Mormons, people who are in the church, don't engage. They don't engage with information outside of the religion, outside of approved resources. So I would say the church hopes their targets will not... Their targets. That's another thing. Look at the language here. It's the same as using the term victim. It's the same as, targets. But yeah, this one's just ridiculous. Double standard. Treating two or more people or circumstances differently, even though they should be treated the same. Personally, I don't think there's a single case in anything, the history of the world, any human being, where I think someone should be treated the same as another person. I just think it fundamentally misunderstands what humanity is and what it means. I think that's ridiculous. Everyone has a different context, story, upbringing. Every act is different. So, Let's see what the example is. When Christians say, if the golden plates are real, then where are they? When Christians say, not critics, when Christians. Atheists use the same logic for the Ten Commandments written on stone tablets. The Book of Mormon witnesses are unreliable. They were Joseph Smith's friends and family. That logic can be applied to the witnesses of Christ's resurrection. Except, okay, well, I'll break that down in a second. This shows that the critic is being internally inconsistent. They use an argument when it's convenient for them without applying it equally to other situations, including those that would reflect poorly on their position. So I guess this is strictly Christians when they're trying to target or criticize or attack Mormonism. If the golden plates are real, then where are they? Here's the thing. We have an answer, right? And if you jumped to the answer of they're in heaven, Moroni took them up into heaven, you've been taught the false narrative. Because, oh my gosh, I'm so whited out. Because this, from what we have from other people's statements, from early church leaders and individuals, what they heard was that Moroni took them and put them in a cave near the hill of Cumorah, and that's where they are to this day. Not brought back up into heaven. That is a different narrative that has now been, is the prevailing narrative that's taught. So we actually do have an answer for where they are, but no one's found that cave, and no one knows where it is because the golden plates weren't real, and that's my stance or position on it. Atheists use the same logic for the Ten Commandments. He goes from Christians to atheists. Atheists use the same logic for the Ten Commandments. Where are the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments? I personally have never once heard that argument. The arguments that I've come across when it comes to biblical scholarship are more like Moses wasn't a historical figure, or the chances that he was is very, very low, and the only evidence that we have showing that he might have been a historical figure is the name Moses. And on top of that, the Moses that would have been a historical figure is not anything like the Moses that we would see in the stories. So, I've never once heard from critics that the Ten Commandments were the stone tablets. Instead, I've heard Moses himself didn't even exist. This is a literary creation. 1 second. All right, I'm back. So, double standards. Once again, I've never heard that argument from any atheist or critic. I really haven't. If wherever you heard this argument, Austin, I'd like to know where. And regarding, because I've just been focusing on like the prominent post-Mormon, ex-Mormon figures. It looks like here he's branching out into saying Christians and atheists. When I think of atheists and Christians, I'm thinking of someone like David Bokovoy. I'm thinking of Bart Ehrman. I'm thinking of Rationality Rules. I'm thinking of I don't know what he goes by now. It's Cosmic Skeptic, or maybe it's something like that. I'm thinking of those individuals, or Matthew Dillahunty. I'm curious as to which one of I've never heard this argument made. I'm curious as to where you heard that argument from, because it is a bad argument. It's also a double standard would be when Christians say, "If the golden plates are real, where are they?" They don't apply that to the Ten Commandments on the stone tablets. I guess once again, this is assuming this one thing that Christians say, which I feel like when it comes to attacks against the church, where are the golden plates falls underneath like 50 other more pressing questions that I would ask if I was a Christian. Like I would ask and depending on the type of Christian and the type of church, like Jehovah's Witnesses, it's like, okay, why do you think Jehovah is Jesus Christ? Like, what indicates to you that Jehovah is Jesus Christ? Biblically. Or, I'd get into those kind of things. Or I'd say, if I was Catholic, I'd say, okay, prove to me where we lost the priesthood. Or if I was just a normal Christian, I'd say, show me where Jesus Christ established a church. I'd like to see that. Or show me um, where it says I need authority to baptize. Or show me where... Like, there's so many other arguments that I feel like I would attack the church on, or I'd ask before saying, if the plays are real, where are they? Double standard, once again, I see this applied against critics of the church. I see a standard for, like, dismissing people and dismissing sources of information while accepting others historically. So dismissing people who are excommunicated from the church or anti-Mormon and dismissing their statements, but then not dismissing the statements of people who are clearly very pro-church or pro-Mormon, or like we're holding that double standard of like, hey, if someone has a vested interest, right? So if they got kicked out of the church, they have a vested interest to attack Joseph. But if they have a vested interest in the church, like the two witnesses who didn't leave the church initially, along with the others who were excommunicated, because they had a vested interest of being financially supported by the church, and all the rest didn't. It's like, how come we're holding this double standard of like, well, we don't accept anything that they said when they left the church, but then we're going to accept these statements from these people who stayed in the church, even though they have this vested interest of being supported by the church. I just think that double standards are rife. I've never, in my exploration of Mormonism, I don't think I've really come across critics who are holding anyone to a double standard. Once again, I think they point this out in apologetics of Fair Mormon, holding people to a double standard, of people trying to hold people historically to different standards. And, for example, LDS Discussions, he actually doesn't use the really extreme problematic statements from other individuals, because he says, hey, those are too fringe for me, those are too secondhand for me, there's not enough supporting evidence to use these, when he could. And so he, in that series, LDS Discussions, he only uses well-vetted, like I believe he tries to aim for primary sources, and he only tries to present the middle-of-the-road thing, because there's a lot of weird fringe evidence that, like, isn't addressed in LDS Discussions. Like, there's strange evidence to suggest that Joseph Smith engaged in JOMO, by the way, homosexual behavior, that he had homosexual relations. There's evidence to suggest that he didn't have a problem with that kind of behavior. There's, but this is where we get, there's evidence saying, like, quote saying that he would go and he'd visit, like, the what are they called? I believe the term that was used was harlots, but where's essentially where you go to commit adultery, you go and you pick up a prostitute. I'm just forgetting the term that they use, but yeah, he would go to the brothel. That's what it was. There's evidence that there was brothels and that he would go visit them, but it's like, it's weaker evidence, and so it doesn't even get brought up in LDS Discussions. So there's even a lot of history and historical evidence and things that don't even get brought up, because people like Mike and John Dehlin and Mormon Stories try to only present the strongest case and not hold people to double standards. Appeal to authority. Once again, this is a manipulation listed up ahead, but claiming that something must be true or false because it is believed or not by someone who is said to be an authority on the subject. This is going to be a fun one to break down. There's no archaeological evidence for the Book of Mormon in the Americas. Black and white statements from an unknown expert. These usually start with there is no evidence and explain why some aspect of the Book of Mormon is false. So this is the example, and then here is the why it's wrong. We are naturally inclined to believe an expert. Faith crisis victims do not have the time to be expert archaeologists, historians, chemists, linguists, lawyers, doctors, and authors. And I'm none of those things. And yet, I somehow know way more than you do. I'm way more informed. It is easier to trust an expert. Critics rely on our belief in experts to make bad arguments. Hold on. Critics rely on our belief in experts to make bad arguments. This is what apologists in behalf of the church do. This is insane. The authority of and what's a good example? The Egyptologist apologists who will make claims about the papyri and about Egyptology to Mormonism and at fair conferences, and then say other things to their scholarly academics in scholarly journals. The authority of the source referenced may be unreliable. Note that actual authorities rarely speak in black and white terms. You know what's really funny to me? The example that he's using that says this, that says this is not fair. There's no archaeological evidence for the Book of Mormon in the Americas. Sorry, excuse me. Who said this? Who said this? Oh, yeah. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints said this. Farms said this. The field of archaeological research in Mormon studies. Field and archaeology. I forget what the F is. What does FARM stand for? The Foundation for Ancient Research in Mormon Studies. There we go. They're the ones who came out and said that there's no evidence to support the Book of Mormon. The research team put together by President Gordon B. Hinckley to find archaeological evidence came out and said there is no archaeological evidence. So your authority that you're trying to say is not okay is your own church, Austin. Source referenced may be unreliable. Note that actual authorities rarely speak in black and white terms. Yeah, except your church spoke in black and white terms when they said that there's no archaeological evidence about it. When the Foundation of Ancient Research in Mormon Studies came out and said there isn't any, and they shut down, by the way, because there isn't any. So this is really funny to me because it's like, okay, don't trust the experts on behalf of the church who said this thing. Once again, he brings up a good point, though. No one has the time to break down the entire Light and Truth letter and respond to all of it. No one has the time to be an expert archaeologist, historian, chemist, linguist, lawyer, doctor, and author, or apologist, I'd add. It's hard to dedicate that much time. It is easier to trust an expert. It's also smarter to just trust an expert. There's a reason why we have to take a step back and go, look, I have to defer to this person. And you know what? You know what's actually even better than this? Because he's trying to make it seem like, oh, it is easier to trust an expert, okay? This is problematic because almost every time it is not an expert, it's not a singular expert. It is, for example, in biblical scholarship, the academic consensus. That means the vast majority of scholars in this field agree that it is X or agree that it is Y. So it's not just one person. It is the majority. When we talk about archaeologists, it is the opinion, or Egyptologists, specialists. All of them will tell you that the Book of Abraham is a standard funerary text that has nothing to do with Abraham. That has nothing to do with what Joseph Smith wrote on in the Pearl of Great Price. And so it's ridiculous to sit here and say we can't trust. Like, who am I supposed to trust then? If I'm naturally inclined to believe an expert and you're advocating that I shouldn't, who am I going to trust then? You, Austin? You've already proven to be very dishonest, and just these first little things here. How many strikes do we give someone? Also, the sun is now going to shine upon me, and a pillar of light that shone around about me as I deconstructed the Light and Truth letter. So I think it's a dumb argument to make. To like, skepticism is fine. I'm very skeptical of a lot of things, but you do not have the time to do all these things, and you absolutely should trust people who have taken their time and dedicated their life to that specific field. If you don't, who are you going to trust? There's no one you should trust if you're not going to believe experts, which you could even agree with him here. We're naturally going to be unexpert. I would argue, yeah, don't believe unexpert. Like, believe experts, plural. Go find the academic consensus. Verify what one says with like 2 or 3 others. Analyze their biases. Say, I'm going to go. A great example is you can take Dan McClellan. an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you can see what he has to say about Deutero-Isaiah and Trito-Isaiah in regards to how they affect and undermine the truth claims of the Book of Mormon, and compare them to someone who, like David Bokovoy, is no longer an active member, but was a member for a long time, but now he's left, so he's disaffected, right? Let's compare what Dan has to say to David. Oh, looks like they agree 100%. They line up on their views in regards to Deutero-Isaiah. And then let's talk to Bart Ehrman and see what he has to say about whether or not Deutero-Isaiah and Trito-Isaiah are real things and the time frame in which they occurred. And then we look at those three individuals, and when we see that they all three agree, what are you left with? You're suddenly left with this idea of, okay, I didn't believe just one of them. I'm believing someone who's in the church, someone who was in the church, and someone who was never affiliated with the church. And they all three agree. Maybe I should believe them. Maybe that is something that's valid. So, first off, authority means something, okay? And appeals to authority absolutely means something, because what else am I going to appeal to? We're just not going to be able to investigate anything. No one has anything to say. No one has anything to comment on. We can't trust a single expert. This is a ridiculous claim to make. And this is an even more ridiculous example to pose. And I would agree that black and white statements usually, like, it is rarely spoken of. And from what I hear, most of the time, critics don't use 100% black and white statements. In fact, who was it? Bill Reel and Radio Free Mormon were talking about Daniel Snuffer. And he's someone who I think he's now an off-sector and off-branch of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Snufferites. He's claimed to, I mean, maybe he's not, he may be still part of the church, but he's claimed that Jesus has visited him multiple times. And Radio Free Mormon refuses to, like Bill Reel was like, do you actually believe that Jesus visited Daniel Snuffer? And Radio Free Mormon said, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Why would I comment on that? I don't know. Like, I'm not going to trust, like, him, or I'm not going to, I'm not going to sit here and base my whole life on what he says and what Jesus said to have said to him. But, like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I can dismiss it and I know he didn't. I know Jesus Christ didn't visit him. And so I think you'll notice even amongst critics of Mormonism, of the church, that they don't speak in black and white terms, that they leave room for people to do whatever they want. Some things are definitely, like, not everything's just gray, right? There are black and white statements. I'm sorry with the freaking, with the darkness here. I really don't. Maybe, is there like a dark mode I could do? Can I not do a dark mode on the Light and Truth letter, please? Is there dark mode? Oh, I love it. There we go. So this one is a ridiculous fallacy to me. I don't like it. I think it's healthy, and it takes longer to vet multiple experts, but when multiple experts align on something, you can probably trust it. And you're definitely better off trusting an expert than you are Austin here from the Light and Truth letter. And you're definitely better trusting an expert than you are trusting what I say here. I can point you to those experts. There's plenty of them who've done Mormon Stories podcasts, and there's plenty who have their own channels. Bart Ehrman has his own channel. Daniel McClellan has his own channel. David Bokovoy has done multiple interviews with Mormon Stories. Go check them out. And they've all published multiple papers you can read. I've read a few of them myself. Dan McClellan has some amazing ones that he's published for free that you can just go check out. Some of them even relating to Mormonism. It's super cool. So, yeah, appeal to authority is just, I don't see how this is a fallacy. It is if it's like, I'm right because authority says I'm right. But if I'm saying, like, hey, authority, Egyptologists widely consider the Book of Abraham to not be a translation. That's not an appeal to authority. It's stating a fact held by multiple experts, and it's not even staked to a truth claim yet. It's just saying, hey, they don't believe that that's a translation. I guess it's attached to the truth claim of is the Book of Abraham a translation? But you can still believe in the spirituality and the validity of your own religious texts and still recognize that, hey, it's not a translation. So, once again, like, they will present evidence, and the evidence can be damning or it can be one way or another, but it's not like it's black and white. I don't know. I've said enough. Bandwagon. Claiming something to be true because most people believe in it. This is Mormonism. It's true because I believe it and my whole ward believes it. It's true because think of the witness of, what is it? Jacob Hansen has a new model because there's so many contradictions with the prophets that in order to deal with them, it is the general witness model or something like that. Essentially, any doctrine you'll know what is actually doctrine of the church if all 15 have taught that at one point and agree on it. So if it's just 2 or 3 fringe apostles saying something and it's not the majority, then we don't believe it. Most Christians believe that the Bible canon is closed, so it must be so. The fallacy preys on the tendency to want to follow the crowd. Advertisers and salespeople use this tactic all the time. Most Christians believe the Bible canon is closed. Once again, I'm confused at who he's attacking here. Critics. Now he's just switching to Christians. I would argue that the bandwagon is the traditional narrative of the church because more people believe in the traditional narrative than they do in the true historical narrative of the church. And most people struggle with the real narrative that is taught by the truth tellers of the church, such as John DeLynn, Bill Reel, Radio Free Mormon. Those people are teaching something that most people don't believe in. They're bringing you new information. Jeremy Runnels isn't claiming something to be true or false because most people believe in it. So this one is probably just strictly Christians, which once again, they're wrong to believe this because most educated Christians, when it comes to biblical scholarship, will recognize that even the idea of the biblical canon is problematic, and the idea that, it's closed or whatever is problematic. So I don't know. I don't even know how to address this one. I don't see how this relates to any of the prominent critics of the church. Appeal to emotion. Once again, big list argument here. Appeal to emotion, seeking to win an argument through the manipulation of emotions, especially in the absence of evidence. The Mormon Church is a bigoted cult. It hates the LGBTQ community and destroys people's lives. Critics will use inflammatory or prejudicial language to influence their target. When someone speaks passionately, we want to believe that they are telling the truth. Sure. This is a real thing that happens, but does this happen with critics? I would argue with LDS discussions, they don't use inflammatory or prejudicial language. They actively avoid it. And I've already given examples of that. An appeal to emotion would be read the Book of Mormon and pray about it, and how you feel is the Spirit answering you. Those feelings, those warm feelings you get, that's an appeal to emotion. I know the church is true because I feel it, because I believe it, because I felt positive experiences. I feel that it's true. That's the appeal to emotion, and we find that significantly more within the church than we do without the church. Also, the Mormon Church is a bigoted cult. It's using inflammatory language for sure, but it's technically not wrong. The church was bigoted in regards to its racist practices with black people. It falls under the definition of cult, and it is currently bigoted in its practices and policies targeted towards the LGBTQ community. And it is a demonstrable fact that has been published on in many personal stories, but also via census and statistic data. Maybe not census in the as in the state giving out a census, but as in people sending out essentially a questionnaire or whatever, and people responding to it. It absolutely has resulted in the deaths of LGBTQ members. I would argue that it absolutely, the church would never say that it hates the LGBTQ community, but when you do something like, say, hey, trans people can't enter the restroom unless they have an escort, and sexual predators, class 2 sexual predators, don't even have to identify or let people know, and they can go in the bathroom, and they can stay overnight at youth activities, and they can hold callings in primary, but a trans person can't. That's bigoted, and that is hateful. What fuels that? It's not love. It's not love that fuels those policies that hurt people and that other people. I do agree that I think the biggest problem on both sides, though, would especially just not amongst the most prominent people, but amongst just your average critics, your random people you encounter, people who've left the church because they're very angry, will use inflammatory language, and same with people who are within the church when responding to those critics will also try and use inflammatory or prejudicial language, such as using the term victims and targets in your examples. And this is how human beings work, by the way. We make emotional decisions, and then we try and support them logically. So appealing to emotion is arguably the strongest thing you can do when trying to convince someone of something or talk to them about something. Which, once again, I don't see that in LDS discussions, for example, because they actively try to not let their emotions get in the way. My hair is all floofy now. They actually call it out a lot of the time, and they will purposefully try to present the information in a way that's not emotional. And when they do get emotional, they say why, and they explain how they are. So, once again, I don't see this amongst some of the most prominent critics of the church. And when they do appeal for an emotion, like, doesn't it feel wrong to you that Joseph Smith married and was having sex with a 14-year-old? I feel like that's a valid appeal to emotion, because you should listen to your internal climate. You should turn inward and listen to, how does this make me feel? What am I actually feeling about this? And let's not forget the appeal to emotion, that if you feel negative or dark, or like something is really, you really struggle with something, you're reading anti-Mormon material, that's the Satan, that's the spirit leaving you. Like, talk about an appeal to emotion. Just because you encounter something that contradicts your beliefs, suddenly it's wrong because I feel bad. Moving on, the false dilemma or dichotomy, the either-or fallacy. Goodness gracious, this is going to be a long video. Okay, the false dilemma or dichotomy, the either-or fallacy. Discussing an issue as if there are only two alternatives and no compromises. So I think one example that we could pull here is the recent LDS discussions episode. It's, I do hear this a lot. Either Joseph Smith got it right, or these people all got it wrong. And that's true. Either Joseph Smith got it right, like, for example, either Joseph Smith got the translation of the papyri right, the Book of Abraham, or he got it wrong. So it's either he got it right and all the experts have it wrong, or he has it right and all the experts, or he has it wrong and all the experts are right. If you have sincere questions about the gospel, then your family will hate and abandon you. Once again, such a weird, why wouldn't you just use the one I gave you? If you have sincere questions about the gospel, this is just so, no one, I've never heard this. I've never seen this. I've never once believed this. But I have believed and heard that if you choose to step away from the church, your family will hate and abandon you, which is also a very common experience. And he's going to talk about that later, and we'll get into that. But that does happen to people. And it's not just in our religion, because it's not a unique thing to Mormonism. It's across all religions. When people tend to step away from the religion and culture they were raised in, it is very difficult for them and their family. And so a lot of times they are othered. They are pushed away. They are abandoned. Critics use this fallacy to create rifts between questioning Latter-day Saints and their families. Between a questioning Latter-day Saint and their families. Why would you do a singular Latter-day Saint and then plural their families? And wards. In the example given, the critic is trying to create resentment toward the family and the ward. Nothing in here is about the ward. Leading to a self-fulfilling prophecy. So once again, we can find critics everywhere, right? But if we're going to the people that you are most likely to encounter, John Dehlin in Mormon Stories. John has created, I believe it's over 70 episodes of a podcast called The Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis, in which he outlines how to not create a rift between you and your family. And when he's talking about the most common thing that's going to happen when you tell your believing family, he does not say that they will hate and abandon you. He says the most common response you're going to get is what he calls crickets. I encourage anyone to go and watch that podcast or listen to it. First off, it's phenomenal in creating peace and harmony and in helping people to focus on their relationships and the things that matter and how to build up and reconstruct a lot of these things. But he never once has taught that that's what happens. And guess what? Actually, you know what's funny? So that's what I heard from John Dehlin from Mormon Stories. What I heard from my bishops time and time again. So we're talking about my bishop who this would have been my stake president after my mission, my current stake president, my first mission president, and my second mission president, and just trying to remember all of them. I think I've thought there was 4. Those are the 3 that come to mind. All of them have told me, and I'm not trying to name drop people. I have names. I'm not just making these people up. But all 3 of them told me to keep these things to myself. On my mission, when I read the CS letter and I was really struggling, I was told to keep that to myself. I was told to keep my struggles to myself. I was told to keep my questions to myself. And that really hurt me. It isolated me. It made me feel like this is not okay to have questions. And I was given that direct counsel by those individuals. Even the most recent, my current stake president, when I came to him, not even about historical issues or any of this stuff, all I came to him about was the dishonesty of the current 15 prophets, seers, and revelators of the church. And he told me to keep that to myself. He also told me some other things that maybe I'll make a video on. But yeah, I just don't see how that's... This is the narrative that the church is more likely to teach. I don't think anyone's teaching this narrative, but if I was going to point a finger at someone, it would have to be the people within the church that emphasize this narrative. And then also dismissing that this never happens is ridiculous because it absolutely happens. And there are plenty of people and personal testimonies that witness this, not just in our religion, but in plenty of religions. Self-fulfilling prophecies are real, though. I do believe that. Begging the question, false premise, reaching a conclusion based on a premise that lacks support. The church hid the fact that Joseph Smith used a seer stone in the translation process. Thus, the church is immoral. That is it immoral to hide behavior from... First off, we could even take this further. Is it immoral and is it cult-like to hide information from your members? Yes. Yes, unequivocally yes. That is immoral to deceive and to hide and lie. We're taught that that's immoral. We're taught that it's immoral to tell white lies. We're taught that it's immoral to not tell the whole truth. There's literally conference talks that say not telling the whole truth is a lie. So that's, yes, this is not begging the question. This is not a false premise. And it's true that the church hid the fact that Joseph Smith used a seer stone in the translation process. Not only did they hide it, they publicly denied it in very popular works written by apostles and prophets. You can see Doctrine of Salvation, where it's flatly denied that Joseph Smith used a seer stone, and then it come to find out that that's not. He definitely did use a seer stone, and even President Nelson made a video about that. That yeah, he definitely did do that. So that's an example of how the church hid that. But not only did they hide it, they actually fed you a false narrative. They commissioned artwork that shows Joseph translating it, looking at it with no stone. It's not just hiding it. It's not just not telling you. It's actually actively feeding you a narrative that isn't true. And if you personally believe, here's another one that will blow your mind. If you believe Joseph Smith used the Urim and Thummim to translate the Book of Mormon, you've been fed a false narrative. The current Book of Mormon as it stands was only translated using a seer stone, and that comes from Joseph Smith, from Emma, and from the scribes that helped him during that translation process. All 4 of them have attested to it. The Book of Lehi, which we do not have, was the only book that Joseph used the Urim and Thummim to translate. And even then, if you really look into it, the Urim and Thummim did not exist. It was spectacles, giant Nephi spectacles. And if you really look into the history, these aren't spectacles like I'm wearing. They're huge because Joseph believed that the ancient Lamanites were ginormous people, bigger than average, huge. These are huge spectacles that wouldn't fit on a human head. And he only mentioned that because one of his treasure-digging friends, when Joseph said, look, I see the golden plates in the hill, his other treasure-seeking friend puts the seer stone up to his eye and says, oh, yes, and do you see the spectacles? And Joseph goes, no. And then his friend says, are you sure? And then Joseph goes, oh, yes, I do see the spectacles. So Joseph was forced to come up with these spectacles, and then he later abandons them because, first off, he doesn't have them, and second off, he's using the seer stones to translate, not the spectacles. And then later in church history, apologists conflated seer stones, peep stones, with the Urim and Thummim. And the church itself tried to conflate the matter. So you're going to see a quote that talks, I think it's Oliver Cowdery, where he testifies before a court that Joseph Smith used the Urim and Thummim. But he's lying, and it's a self-admitted lie, and he's lying for the Lord. It contradicts what he said earlier in regards to the translation process. So it's not a false narrative to say this, and it is absolutely immoral. It suddenly takes a giant leap in logic. There's no giant leap here. If I tell you something that isn't true, that's a lie. It's a deceit. It's a deception. Is that immoral or moral to you? It's immoral. The victim will likely agree with the conclusion if a false premise is assumed. Nothing here is false. Even if the target does not agree with the conclusion, the believed false premise itself can generate doubt. Hold on. Even if the target, notice we're not saying victim anymore, does not agree with the conclusion, thus the church is immoral. The believed false premise itself can generate doubt. The church hid the fact that Joseph Smith used a seer stone in the translation process. This is just true. It's not a false premise. There's so much evidence for this. Not only is there evidence for this, but there's actual people within the church that were actively writing to leaders and making statements saying the traditional narrative cannot be sustained. We have to be more honest. There are quotes saying, I think in the past we used to, I'm sure you can go find it on the CS letter or something where they've said, in the past we used to hide stuff and now we can't do that because of the internet. These are quotes from people who are within the church, who are historians of the church, who are apologists of the church. This is not just a critic thing. This is a thing that is widely agreed upon by everyone, and that absolutely happened, and that absolutely was a problem. Non sequitur, a conclusion or statement that does not... Oh, actually, hold on. I got to check on one thing. Give me a second. Okay, I'm back. Okay, I just got done briefly talking with my wife. It's just crazy how much time this is going to take to have to go through this whole thing. Just these two... just this one fallacies section is insane. Okay, non sequitur. This one's interesting, and I have a lot to say on this, but also not a lot to say. A conclusion or statement that does not logically follow from the previous argument or statement. Non sequitur is Latin for it does not follow. The example is Russell M. Nelson was a member of a college secret fraternity, Skull and Bones. How is he God's prophet? First off, once again, I've never heard anyone make this claim. But second off, a massive leap in the explanation here is a massive leap in logic from the opening statement to the conclusion. The end result is a conclusion that illogically flows from the underlying premise. So a couple things. Once again, I'm approaching this from the idea of like, hey, look, Austin, if you just want to pull random quotes off of Twitter and Reddit from anyone, sure, this crap might have been said. But when it comes to someone like John DeLynn or any of these other people, this has never been said. This is not the strongest argument. This is not the strongest critics and criticisms of the church. But even then, This is lacking context. So, sure, Russell M. Nelson was a member of a college secret fraternity, Skull and Bones. How is he God's prophet, right? It might seem like it does not follow. But if I were to just add a couple paragraphs here, right, about the fraternity Skull and Bones, about what it entailed, and then about what happened subsequently in Russell M. Nelson's life regarding this fraternity, then I could call into question, how is he God's prophet? Right off the top of my dome, he covered up a pedophile ring that involved members of his family, and he used a lawyer from his fraternity, Skull and Bones, and a judge from this fraternity in order to get the case thrown out. If you think that the fact that this fraternity did not play a role in that, you are naive. And if you'd like to learn more about this, ldsabuse.com. Maybe it's .org. ldsabuse.com. Maybe it's .org. This one. Latter-day Abuse. Home. This guy. This guy does amazing reporting. ldsabuse.info. Okay, this is the site. This site, just spend 2 hours on it, and then you will be asking yourself the question, how is Russell M. Nelson a prophet of God? He has done amazing research. He has done amazing deep dives into everything. This is involving court cases, the Gordon Bowen child molestation, how it was covered up. It's crazy, and it's crazy the ties that come back to the Skull and Bones fraternity. So yes, this small statement could have been said, but even then, it's not necessarily a non sequitur. It's just lacking what this context means. Because if you understood what the Skull and Bones fraternity was, and then the actual legitimate secret combinations that Russell M. Nelson has participated in and entered into and sworn death oaths about, then you would be asking yourself, how is he God's prophet? Russell M. Nelson is actually what the Book of Mormon warned against. It's insane to me. Also, this will be a different video. I really don't like Russell M. Nelson. This is a big thing. But there's a lot about, there's claims that, he deliberately is pushing back against the narrative of unconditional love in the church. He's informed his administrations to stay away from that term, to not include it in certain quotes. He obviously covered up this child molestation case and many others. He's very petty and has held onto a feud between him and President Gordon B. Hinckley regarding the name of the church and temples. And let's not even get into his 95th birthday celebration and his 100th birthday celebration, how cult-like those were, how inappropriate and idol worshipy those were. It's insane, the damage that I think Russell M. Nelson has caused the church, in my mind. And the horrible thing is, by the time a lot of this amazing research actually gets out, because a lot of it's starting to come up in court cases, so it's going to hit mainstream media. By the time it gets out there, he's most likely going to be dead, and no one cares. If you're a dead prophet and you've done something, they don't care. And this isn't me just asserting that. When I went to my stake president, and I went to him initially in October of 2023. Yes. And I said, hey, here's all my issues. And particularly, I had a lot of issues regarding Elder Ballard. And this was because of the issues between him and Tim Ballard. And there's a lot of court documents that came out and a lot of allegations and a lot of things about Elder Ballard. And then when my stake president followed up with me, which took him months, by the way, to follow up with me. I think he followed up with me either in December or January. Elder Ballard was dead. That's a problem, because then when I went to him, he literally told me, he's like, yeah, well, he's not around anymore. And I was like, yeah, but these are still important. And he's like, yeah, but what do you want me to do about that? Like, he told me, he's like, I can raise these issues to the other living members, but he's like, that one just doesn't matter to me anymore. And I was like, wow, okay. And there it is. All right, non sequitur. I also, once again, in the larger context, I see non sequiturs from Fair Mormon. I don't see a lot of non sequiturs in mainstream from John Dehlin or LDS discussions or any of those. I would like an example, if you have one, Austin, from one of those more mainstream critics. Argument from ignorance asserts that a proposition is true because it is not yet proven false. Alternatively, that silence is an admission of guilt. Hold on. Asserts that a proposition is true because it is not yet proven false. Alternatively, that silence is an admission of guilt. Before metal plates with writing in ancient Israel were found, critics would say, we've never seen ancient people write on metal plates, therefore the Book of Mormon is false. Critics argue that something cannot be because they cannot imagine how it could be. This intellectual shortcut does not seriously consider the totality of the available evidence. So, as an example, is saying before metal plates with writing in ancient Israel were found. So, before then, critics would say, we've never seen ancient people write on metal plates. Therefore, the Book of Mormon is false. Once again, I don't think I've ever personally heard this, but second off, it is a fact that writing on plates, like how the Book of Mormon describes the gold plates, has never occurred among ancient people. And when it comes to metal plates, they weren't gold, but when it came to those plates, it was very small amount of plates, and the amount of information that they were able to put on those plates was so small that estimates using those metal plates that were found, which they were found significantly after the time that the metal plates would have needed to have been found, or would have been with the Book of Mormon. The estimated size of the Book of Mormon would be ridiculously big. And for a better discussion on that, you can look at the Dan McClellan, where he's debunking these golden plates that were found a few months ago, and a bunch of like Word Radio and a bunch of people picked up on it, and he immediately was disproving it. And Dan McClellan's a scholar of this, and he showed how it was a forgery, where it was forged, who was responsible for it, how that person who was responsible for producing these plates has made other forgeries, and how he's not, that's why he's also not accepted amongst like any academia, because he's been known to produce forgeries. So it's like, okay, no metal plates with writing in ancient Israel like the Book of Mormon were ever, or have ever, or will ever be found. And you might get mad at me for that last statement, but that's just not how ancient people wrote things down and documented things. We have birch bark that was written on. We have papyri. We have, for instance, the Rosetta Stone. But we do not have metal plates like the Book of Mormon wants us to, like the Book of Mormon, or like people want us to think we have. So actually, considering the totality of available evidence, this stands true. And it is a powerful indicator of the likelihood of the Book of Mormon being fraudulent. So this is actually not an argument from ignorance. It is a based argument. And it's funny, it shows your ignorance, Austin, of ancient civilizations and of the actual archaeological record in regards to metal plates. And this one's a big one for me. I just don't, it's crazy how there's so many of these put out and they can just be disproven like this. Slippery slope, assuming catastrophic results from a premise. It is dangerous to accept the doctrine of personal revelation from God. Before you know it, we'll see criminals committing heinous acts claiming revelation from God. Once again, this is a true statement. We've seen this with the Heaven's Gate cult. We've seen this with so many offshoots of Mormonism that become cults. And this is the example, which is a true example. And then the argument is, it is a false idea meant to exploit the target's risk aversion. It is a proven method of cults to tell you to go home and to pray to God and ask him if X is true, if what I told you is true. Go home, go into a private spot, pray to God. That is a tactic. It's a proven tactic that cult leaders use. So yeah, you shouldn't do that. That's an unreliable, untrustworthy tactic. 100%. It has been proven time and time and time and time again among so many different cult leaders that is how they can get you. It's not. Personal revelation absolutely is dangerous. Even amongst the modern church, personal revelation has gotten people into so much hot water, especially with like Tim Ballard and the Snufferites and the preppers and prepperism. Personal revelation, like visions of glory, these are huge issues amongst the church that have real world effects that are harmful to people. And yeah, before you know it, you're going to see criminals committing heinous acts claiming revelation from God. Like criminals who've broken laws in the government claiming revelation from God, like the leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or like people like Russell M. Nelson covering up abuse in the church using his own organizations that he swore death oaths in. So yes, first off, this isn't even a slippery slope. It's a proven pattern. So I don't see how this example in particular is a slippery slope, especially when it's true. I gotta step away for a minute. I'll be right back. So I'm back. I just want to interject here too. I hope you can see how daunting it is to take on this entire letter and how it's not a simple thing to sit here. And I'm saying a lot of things, but critics of me would want me to actually link and show everything, which would take even more time. And I'm showing, here and there things that I can, but they would want to see all the examples of cults using that tactic that I talked about. They would want to see a list and have me actually name the names and prove it. And it's a lot. And it's way more than anyone could be. It's way more than should be expected of anyone, which is why it's just hard. It's like if it takes infinitely more time and effort to break down and to refute something that was said than it does to just say it. And I hope that is made evident here in me going through these and listing out why these things just aren't true, or they're wrong, or they themselves are flawed. All right, next one, questionable cause. Correlation versus causation. Let's go. This is an oversimplification. Presumes there is a single cause of a more complex phenomenon. It is often used to insinuate that a correlated variable is the cause of an outcome. Example, Utah has a higher than average suicide rate. Thus, the LDS Church makes people depressed and suicidal. Okay. Why is this messed up? In my experience, questionable cause is the primary type of data critics use aside from personal stories. When the manipulator lacks evidence, his or her only corroboration is questionable correlations. So, once again, this is a valid fallacy that he's bringing up, but he's making it seem like personal stories aren't a good data source. Which I would agree. I think relying on singular personal stories is bad. But relying on thousands of reported personal stories that all align isn't. That then becomes a study. That then becomes an actual research paper or whatever. When we have, it's not because personal stories are inherently flawed, but if we get, once again, it's the whole idea of unexpert versus experts. If we have one person's opinion in personal story versus thousands of people's stories. So I think this is trying to get you to mistrust personal stories, which you should on an individual basis. But at large, if they all tend to corroborate the same things, it brings validity towards those stories. And then they can become an indicator, and it's no longer a personal anecdote, and it is no longer correlation or whatever. This is also hard because this is just a big one to tackle. Okay, so the example is Utah has a higher than average suicide rate, right? And this is obviously a much more complicated issue. But maybe looking at other things and really digging into it, we can have answers. It's like, okay, Utah has a higher than average suicide rate. thus the LDS Church makes people depressed and suicidal. I would agree this is bad. But Utah has a higher than average suicide rate among kids who are 8 years and older or younger. 8 years old and younger. Interesting. Such a weird, specific thing. How come kids in Utah have a higher suicide rate and have higher suicidal tendencies and thoughts and higher suicidality than the rest of the world? Why? Can anyone tell me why? Maybe because we teach that once you turn 8, you're capable of sinning and not making it to heaven. Because if you sin and you don't repent, you're not making it to the celestial kingdom. So kids internalize that at a young age from our teachings, and they think it's better to just die before they get baptized. And this is absolutely something that I have felt. This is something many people I know have felt. This is something that has been attested to in many personal stories. And why else would I have gotten that? Why? Why else are my journals from when I was 6, 7, 8 years old talking about me? I'm saying I'm going to commit suicide on this day. This is a personal thing to me. What teaching could have led that to me? It's not just because it's something else is going on in my life. Specifically, are you kidding me? When we look at that specifically in younger ages, it's an increased rate. That's not a questionable cause. That, if anything, that's like, oh, wow. That's almost like we know why. There's almost no other reason why it would be that way. There's nothing else. The only correlation being church doctrine. So that's one aspect of this very complex question. I have attended many therapy groups, and I see how, and I'll give some breathing room here. It definitely depends on the person and their relationship to the doctrine. And I think that the church is moving in a very positive direction, mainly because they're stepping away from so much hard doctrine, and they're just opening it up and watering things down so much. But people who grew up in a more doctrinal heavy church absolutely are harder on themselves, more depressed, and more suicidal. And it's a hard term, suicidal. It's more like they want to die. They would never pull the trigger because that means you don't get to heaven, but they want to die. And that's, I literally heard that like the past month in my therapy group. Like someone just like, I'm just ready to die and go to heaven. The way that we teach about life in a weird way makes people value their life less here on earth, which is just, it's devastating to me. That's a whole video topic in and of itself. I would only ever correlate on an individual basis suicidality and depression after talking to the person about their beliefs. So hearing how they talk about the church, how they talk about their atonement, their relationship to God, whether their personal relationship is a more authoritarian or a more loving and forgiving God. And if it's more authoritarian and doctrinal heavy and they're beating themselves up and they view terms very black and white, and that's their relationship to the church, and then they're depressed and suicidal because of that, and they're depressed and suicidal, I would then say, yeah, okay, that's because of the church. But also, in regards to the LGBTQ community, that is just a proven thing. That is an epidemic of depression and suicidality because of how we've talked about that community and how we continue to treat them. And that's proven, and that's statistical data, and that's not a correlation versus causation. That is, I can look at our modern policies that are getting published this month, and I can see how those are actively harming and othering the LGBTQ community. And when you other someone, when you make them feel unworthy because of who they are, you're just going to sit there and think that that isn't going to lead to depression and suicidality. That's not correlation. It's not, they're not, that's a one-to-one direct cause. That's a causal relationship. Now, this one is, once again, this one is one that people like to throw out a lot, and they do back it up with a lot of personal stories and personal experience. In my opinion, we can completely remove this from criticisms of the church, and the church can still be thoroughly dissected and disproven. So, but this also, I mean, it's a modern current day thing. Like, I think another way of looking at it is just like what evidence does Austin want here when the manipulator lacks evidence, right? Because if John DeLynn, who's a psychologist, has talked with thousands of individuals from the LGBTQ community, and they've all reiterated how unsafe and depressed and suicidal the church has made them feel, is that not good enough evidence for you? Because we have entire movements, like the anti-vaccine movement, based on less evidence than that. If you go back and you look at not to get super crazy political here, but if you look at the original anti-vax study that originated in Europe, it was 12 or 13 individuals of self-reported diagnostics of their behavior and whether or not their behavior changed after receiving the rubella, mumps, and something else, measles shot at 12 to 15 months. And it was all self-reported, and it was only 12 people. And that one study using 12 people, which was problematic, and some of those people were represented incorrectly, spawned an entire movement. Anyways, I just bring that up to say people make crazy decisions off of less evidence than there is for the evidence of there being a higher suicide rate because of the church. So this is more a personal, what do you think qualifies as evidence? And Austin here probably won't accept anything short of the church coming out and admitting itself that it is responsible. Another thing, the church engaged in electroshock therapy, where they would hook up LGBTQ members to have electrical charges shocked into them, sometimes on their genitals, it had been reported. And they would show them straight pornography and then gay pornography and then shock them if they got aroused watching the gay pornography. And then those people who participated in that study, when they reported that they were depressed and some of them killed themselves, we're just going to say that that wasn't because of what you did to them, because of the trauma and torture, because it was torture that occurred to them at BYU under Dallin H. Oaks, who then lied about that happening. Crazy, right? Insane. Texas sharpshooter fallacy. This fallacy takes data out of its context and tries to make it appear more impressive than it is. The name of this fallacy comes from an example of a Texas gunslinger who shoots randomly at a barn door. Afterwards, a target is painted around each bullet hole. The holes are random, but the painted targets appear to prove that the gunslinger is a great shot. This is fair Mormons' bread and butter. They love doing this. View the Hebrews in the late war have some parallels with the Book of Mormon, so it must have been the source for the Book of Mormon. Once again, I don't know anyone who says this. This last statement particularly, so that must have been the source for the Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith, even people who are still within the church, who are apologists of the church, view him as an inspired syncretist, because it is undeniable how many things around Joseph Smith make it into the Book of Mormon. So this is a straw man fallacy. You're setting this up because this is not what, at least the critics I've heard say. It's more like, how come View the Hebrews, The Late War, The Adventures of Captain Kidd, Joseph Smith's father's dream, the events in Joseph Smith's life in regards to cheating on Emma with Fanny Alger makes it into the Book of Mormon, and also treasure digging, slippery treasure, that idea makes it into the Book of Mormon, the mound builder myth, Protestant sermons that were occurring at the time around him. It's not just these two books. It's look at all these things around Joseph Smith and how all of them find their way into the Book of Mormon. And those are just off the top of my head. I'm sorry. There are so many things that make it into the Book of Mormon. So it's not a Texas sharpshooter fallacy. I'm not shooting all these holes. In fact, I'm not sitting here shooting all these holes and then finding things to fill these holes. I'm saying, oh, wow, look at all these different things that have not just parallels, but in some instances, like the same themes, ideas, overarching storylines, wording, verbiage, it's so much more than just these parallels. This is such a disingenuous take on the sources for the Book of Mormon. To me, this is grasping at straws. Book of Mormon critics tend to compare loose parallels with other books and then exaggerate how they are bullseyes for the source of the Book of Mormon. Excuse me? It's not... First off, I'd exaggerate. It's not an exaggeration to say that there are parallels. That's very soft, non-black and white language. In fact, I'm sorry, View of the Hebrews was such a problematic text that there were secret Mormon meetings held by the 70 and the Quorum of the 12 and the First Presidency with scholars about this book because it was such a threat to the narrative that the Book of Mormon is a historical document. View of the Hebrews, full stop, was actually directly called to be investigated by Mormon prophets because it is so threatening to the narrative that Joseph Smith didn't translate the Book of Mormon. He wrote it and was inspired. So to sit here and act like this is just something that critics view as a problem is you grasping at straws that don't even exist. This was a problem for the church, self-admitted and acknowledged, and it still is to this day. I'm not exaggerating. All the things I've told you are true, accurate, and factual. It's not an exaggeration to say that that book's a huge problem. Shifting the burden of proof, making a claim that needs evidence, then shifting the responsibility for disproof of that claim to another party. Bringing men conspire to get Joseph Smith killed, prove that I'm wrong. I've never once heard this. I've heard this narrative, but it's one of the fringe narratives I was talking about earlier. I've never heard prove that I'm wrong after this statement. Once again, are we just pulling this from any random Reddit user? Are we pulling this from any random dude who posts on Twitter? Like, dude, once again, we will get insane, just brain dead things on Twitter, okay? I would never even think to write a letter like this, criticizing believing members of the church by pulling what believing members say on r/Mormon or r/Latter-day Saint or on Twitter. And I could take some of those people who are very firm in the faith, I could paint the worst picture imaginable of members of the church. Just complete and utter vile bigotry and just nonsensical worldviews, horrible takes. But that wouldn't be, that would be disingenuous of me to do, because that is not the average believer. That's not the average member. That's not the average critic or whatever. This is just not okay. This has never been said. And if it has, it's by some random Reddit user or Twitter user. This is... no. And critics point to weak, coincidental, and often contradictory connections, and then in place of evidence, they shift the burden of proof back onto the church or the believer. I've seen this in regards to fair, shifting the burden of proof to the people who are trying to point out the flaws. Or like Jacob Hansen shifting the burden of proof, trying to get people to debate him on the naturalistic emergence of the Book of Mormon. This is just a very disingenuous fallacy to bring up here. Also, like, please pick better examples, dude. Austin, if you're gonna write this, dude, I can think of better examples to put in here. Shifting the burden of proof, okay? Making a claim that needs evidence, then shifting the responsibility for disproof of that claim to another party. The Book of Mormon is true, prove me wrong. Instead of, I have to prove the Book of Mormon is true. And the funny thing is, I can disprove the Book of Mormon in more than one ways. It's so easy and simple. It's like literally, if the Book of Mormon is what it claims it is, a historical document translation, okay? Why is Deutero and Trito Isaiah found within the Book of Mormon when the narrative of the Book of Mormon takes place before those texts were written? They should not be appearing in the Book of Mormon. You need no other argument and no further explanation than that. The Book of Mormon is not historical. It is false. That one thing, and that's one. We're not even getting into all the other anachronisms. We're not getting into priority or Mosiah priority order. We're not getting into all the contradictions, all the changes that have been made to it. We're not getting into Um, like, we can analyze the Book of Mormon. It's false archaeologically, it's false narratively and historically, it's false based on Joseph Smith's by the witness testimonies of it lead those who sincerely investigate them to not believe in the validity of the plates. There are so many ways we can go about disproving the Book of Mormon. And I don't see critics engaging in shifting the burden of proof to anyone. Generalization, a claim based on insufficient evidence, drawing a conclusion about a large population using a small, unrepresentative sample. Oh my gosh, I'm not even halfway down this page. Somebody help me. Claim based on insufficient evidence, drawing a conclusion about a large population using a small, unrepresentative sample. Local wardens take leaders to not respond adequately enough to an instance of abuse. Therefore, the church is abusive. Claims of abuse in the church or hostilities towards sexual or other minorities often fall into this category. Critics use anecdotal examples to prove an untrue conclusion. Yeah, I will once again refer the actual truth seeker and you, Austin, if you'd actually like to care and research this. I still can't wrap my head around 10 years before 2004 and then 20 years leading up to 2024, 30 years, and you are unaware of so much information. Did you even investigate anything, dude? Or did you just read the CES letter like 100 times? I know that that's what's taught in the church. I'm being mean here. I know that we're just taught to reread the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again. Just keep reading the Book of Mormon. Never read anything else. Just keep reading it, reread it, reread it, reread it. Is that what you thought you needed to do? You just keep rereading the CES letter, and that's the extent and the depth of your insights? Yeah, dude, this is ridiculous. It really is. If you actually were genuine and you looked into this stuff like you claimed you should have, dude, even if you had read Rough Stone Rolling, like I'm going back into the year 2004, if you had read No Man Knows My History, and then you also read the apologetics of No Ma'am, That's Not History, because that would have been before 2004, you would know this stuff, and you wouldn't be making these arguments that are nonsensical. Okay, once again, claims of abuse, go to latterdayabuse.com. It's not just one thing. There's so many reports. There's actual systematic things set in place. That I'd also refer to you, Sam Young, and his work. He was excommunicated for trying to fix problems of abuse within the church. I could also refer you to Nemo the Mormon and what a bunch of brilliant people did over in Europe in regards to abuse in the church and getting the church to implement policies and procedures to limit that abuse, because this is absolutely a problem. And it's not just a couple stories here and there like you'd have you believe with the terms anecdotal examples. Austin, I'm sorry, if I have hundreds of anecdotal examples, they cease to become just a one-off anecdotal example. If I have proof that modern prophet and apostle has covered up pedophile abuse rings, that he literally was handed documents that literally on the document said how to cover up a rape abuse, how to cover up a rape on the legal document. He was handed those by his lawyer, and you're going to sit here and tell me that. And that's not even anecdotal. We're talking literal hard facts, official documentation. And we're going to sit here and pretend that the church isn't abusive in that manner? Are we really going to do that? This is ridiculous. The church has a problem with sexual abuse. It has it at a problem at a local level, at a larger systemic level. It has reached its roots deep into even the highest levels. The prophet himself has engaged in covering up abusive sexual behavior within the church. At the highest levels and at the lowest levels, this is a problem, and it's not a generalization. And once again, you can see the specific examples that are definitely not generalizations listed here. Insulting and inappropriate, Austin. That's all I have for today. Actually, I'll go to the end of this section here, building up versus tearing down. Okay, sorry, got fired up here at the end. Referencing the CS letter and other doubt-bombing critical tactics, Manuel Padro, an anthropologist and former Latter-day Saint, commented, The tactic of intentionally luring Latter-day Saints into a situation where they are bombarded with questions they don't know how to answer is a documented tactic used by these groups. Which groups? No, genuinely, which groups? And even before it was documented, it was clearly going on. When I was a kid, the Lighthouse Ministry, I was going to say, this is the one group where I would believe you. The Lighthouse Ministry, their mission is to take people out of the church. And CARM, the Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry, were two big groups using this strategy. Now Mormon Stories, nope, you're wrong. I will fight you on this. This is not how Mormon Stories operates. They do not lead you into situations and then bombard you with questions. They faithfully represent the best of apologetics, and they provide their answers, and they don't try and lead you one way or another, and they provide support for those who are in the church and out of the church, and they don't try and sway you one way or another. John consistently brings on those who are anti-church and pro-church. His most recent was bringing on two brothers. It was like the stick of Joseph, and bringing them on to defend the church and talk about the church. They were believing members. He brings on apologists. He brings on scholars who are church members. He brought on Dan McClellan. This is insane to think that, to put Mormon Stories in the same category as Lighthouse Ministry. The Life After Ministry, Mormon Think, and a number of other groups are all relying on the same abusive tactic. Once again, is this not an appeal, by the way, to unexpert, a singular expert, Manuel Padro, who's an anthropologist, by the way? What does he have to say about literally any of this shiz? They're trying to coerce you into a situation where they can bombard you with so many doubt-provoking questions that they can cause your resolve to collapse and your identity to fall apart. Inside of that vacuum created by an act of psychological rape. Talk about inflammatory language. They hope to impregnate you with their own belief system. I'm sorry, this was the biggest thing for me when I deconstructed Mormonism, is the lack of a belief system. I had to go actively find and seek out and reconstruct my own. This is brain dead. This is so stupid. If that sounds abusive, it's because that's what it is. It's an extension of the cultural. It's not abusive to tell you the truth. It's not abusive to present you with the whole information. It's not. It's abusive to not do that, and it's abusive for you to stay within that organization while they withhold that information. It's an extension of the cultural legacy of the Inquisition. Wholly inflammatory language. This is crazy. They can't torture you, but they can humiliate you and pressure you with questions you don't have an answer to yet. They try to hit you up with too many of these questions to answer, because if they don't, it wouldn't work. That's how the CES letter works. Dude. I'll end this here. First off, this quote illustrates so many of these same manipulation strategies and fallacies that Austin criticizes here. Appeal to authority, inflammatory language, but also this just isn't true regarding Mormon Stories or Mormon Think. I don't believe that for either of those organizations or people. But also this idea that they hit you with too many questions to answer. I really genuinely did not lose my faith because there was too many questions for me to answer. I was very comfortable after reading the CES letter. Well, actually, I'll say I wasn't comfortable, but I maintained after the CS letter, I lived with a lot of questions, and I grew to be comfortable existing in a space where, yeah, there's questions. What took me out of the church is two things. It's horrible apologetics, like this Light and Truth letter by Austin here, and it was not with questions. It was with facts and evidence that weren't questions. It's not a question of Deutero and Trito-Isaiah making it into the Book of Mormon. I don't have a question there. There's no question to be had. It's proof that the Book of Mormon narrative is not historical. Which, by the way, I'm saying that, but that doesn't even have to mean, you don't have to, you, viewer, listener, Austin, you don't have to jump to the conclusion that means the Book of Mormon isn't inspired or isn't spiritual, or that I can't derive meaning from it. All I'm saying is it isn't historical, which is a truth claim of the church. The church claims the Book of Mormon is historical, and I absolutely believe within the next 50 to 100 years, the church will move away. They're already moving away from this idea that the Book of Mormon is historical. The Book of Mormon will continue to exist, and the only way they're going to move forward is by moving away from the narrative that it is historical. Yeah, I disagree. I know that this is a real thing, though. I know that there are, for example, the Lighthouse Ministry. There are groups out there that have existed and existed to try and take people out of Mormonism. because they believed it was the best thing to do. Because, need I remind you, they felt betrayed and lied to by their organization, and they wanted to present people with the facts. And they were biased in wanting people to leave the church. But organizations such as Mormon Stories, they don't want people to leave the church. They don't want people to stay in the church. They don't have an agenda that way. The only thing that they want is to present the information and put it out there, and to provide a platform for minoritized voices and for all voices and stories within Mormonism, faith promoting and not faith promoting. Why do critics resort to these tactics? I don't know what this arrow is. Are these questions? And first off, like I said, a lot of these tactics critics don't resort to. Some of the most reputable critics don't resort to. And can their critiques stand on their own without using inflammatory and abusive rhetoric like this? Yes. I can, without inflammatory language, tell you that the Book of Mormon and the claims Joseph Smith made around it, because Joseph Smith claimed to translate it, we know that Joseph Smith lied, that that's not true, because we can prove that the Book of Mormon is false because of things such as Deuteronomy and Trito-Isaiah making it into the Book of Mormon, because of things such as internal inconsistencies within the text of the Book of Mormon, because of textual analysis of the Book of Mormon, because of all of the different outside sources that make it into the Book of Mormon, because the history the Book of Mormon presents is false, because of the lack of Jewish culture and Jewish rituals and religion within the Book of Mormon, because of the fundamental misunderstanding of Native Americans and of race, and because so much of the Book of Mormon is 19th century Protestantism, because ancient people did not write texts in the manner that the Book of Mormon was written. That's not how ancient texts sounded, because Reformed Egyptian is not like I can just go on and on and on and on and on and on with no inflammatory language and no abusive rhetoric, and I can critique every last point of Mormonism. The more I learned from critics, the more I saw the manipulative techniques being used against me. Once I started seeing it, I couldn't unsee it. Ironically, I feel this way about apologetics. Once you start seeing how Austin here in the Truth and Light letter, and how Tad Callister uses these tactics in a case for the Book of Mormon, once you see how Michael R. Ash uses these tactics in Shaken Faith Syndrome, once you see it, once you see how you're being, how the things they claim critics are doing, they're doing, once you see how dishonest and disingenuous apologists are, once you see once you see these problems, a lot of them I've pointed out, you cannot unsee it in any apologist. Some of the best, straight up, if you're watching this and you're a believing member, whatever, even if you're not, the best thing you can do for your faith, the best thing to try and keep you in the church, is to go and to watch David Bacavoy's interviews with Mormon Stories, and to read the book that he wrote for members of the church regarding critical scholarship in the Bible, and to watch Dan McClellan, and his Mormon Stories interview, and watch his content on YouTube, and read his articles and research done on Mormonism. Those are the best things you can do for your testimony. Those things will, Dan and David, they both go about it in two different ways, and they both present to you how you can still be a member of the church, be a force for good, and still engage with critical scholarship of both Mormonism and the Bible. And they do it in a very healthy, faith-promoting, church-promoting way. I honestly, out of everyone I've listened to, David Bacavoy still to this day speaks the most lovingly about the church, the most positively, and he gave me the most hope. And that's including the positive things that I've heard from Jacob Hansen, from the Come Back podcast, and he's not even a member anymore. He left the church. So that's crazy that person is doing a better job than any of you. Please do better. I could do better. I just might mess around and find out. I just might do better than you. and make my own, because people who are struggling and want to stay in the faith deserve to have something that is competent. They deserve to not be misled and lied to. They deserve to have something that can actually give them hope and won't leave them feeling betrayed yet again. That's what people deserve who are questioning things. And unfortunately, the Light and Truth letter does not give that to them. And the case for the Book of Mormon doesn't, and Shaken Faith Syndrome doesn't. So do better. Please do better for the sake of people staying in the church, because they deserve better. Yeah, I wish I could unsee these problems too. I'm sure this is a very positive and uplifting letter if you were to just read it and not know all these things. I will continue this series. Next up is building up versus tearing down. I have no idea. It looks like this is going to be at least a 20-part series, genuinely. We got a lot to go over, so. But thank you, everyone, for watching.